Good evening. Welcome to The Pipeline. I'm senior columnist with the Western Standard, Cory Morgan. This is our weekly news and affairs show and panel where we'll have a few of us breaking down and giving our thoughts on the top stories of the day. So I am joined on my right. I'll start actually with our opinion editor, Nigel Hannaford. How's it going, Nigel?
It's going good. We got a lot of good stuff today, Cory.
There it is. This last few weeks has been so easy to find stuff to talk about. It's just paring it down to what we're going to focus on is the hard part. And next to Nigel is our news editor, Dave Naylor. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
It's going well. I'd like to first thank my makeup artist, Michelle, today, who did a fine job covering a small blemish that erupted on my forehead overnight.
I thought you looked particularly pretty today, Dave.
I kind of looked like the Prime Minister the other week, and everybody thought he may have got a high heel to the head.
We're still speculating.
I say that subject has never really got cold, has it?
No.
It's the water cooler of the situation.
Well, until there's an answer, we are free to speculate. He won't tell us exactly. Well, he said it was roughhousing with the kids, I think.
Yes.
All right. Well, on to more serious matter. Actually, I will start before we get into all the issues we have. As I said, we're lined up today. Talk about our sponsor, one of them, and it's the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. You hear me talk about them every week on the pipeline here, or Derek when he's on it. They have been a fantastic sponsor, and they are a fantastic group. It's as it sounds. It's a shooting sports association. If you take part in shooting sports, whether it's hunting, collecting, target shooting, doesn't matter. It's your business. You got to stand up for your right to keep doing that, and that's what these guys are about. You join that. There's safety in numbers. It helps protect your rights, but they need you to become a member. Check them out. Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Their website is CSSA-CILA.org, or just Google them, Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Take out a membership. Invest in your freedoms, guys. It's important. All right. Speaking of freedoms, free podcasting is under threat. Ottawa is coming after us, Dave. What's going on?
As Nigel so eloquently put it in one of his columns this week, it's the Anaconda of censorship, strangling the country. This time they're after podcasts, streaming services, and I think we should go to our business reporter, Sean Polzer, to fill us in.
All right, Sean, bring us up to speed.
How's it going? What is there to say? So they put out the first draft rules, I guess, on C11, which was ostensibly to regulate big streamers like Netflix and Apple TV and all the people that are distributing what they consider to be equivalent of broadcast things like movies and programming. And the bill was ostensibly to set Canadian content limits similar to what regular, and a code of conduct similar to what regular broadcasts have to go through. But there was this kind of sneaker in there that podcasters, anybody who makes over about $10 million is going to have to register with the government and potentially be regulated for the content that they stream on their services.
Yeah, so Nigel, the term registry, that always gets a chill and down my back immediately. That's always the first step to more control, isn't it?
Can you imagine having this discussion 5 years, 10 years ago and said, everybody who aspires to be a newspaper has to be registered? People have said, what? If I want to start a newspaper, why do I have to tell the government? I'm just going to go and do it. We have free press. Well, unfortunately, the newspapers blew that when they started taking government money, because in order to get the money, they had to give them the address, send it here. So that isn't quite the comparison it used to be. But really, why should anybody who has got something to say have to register as a certain type of sayer in order to go and have their free speech? Now, one of the things that Sean mentioned was that there was a $10 million annual revenues threshold. If you don't meet that, you don't have to register. So that sounds okay. But I'm wondering, and maybe Sean will enlighten us on this, maybe you don't generate $10 million a year as a podcaster, but you probably don't have your own carrier either. So are you going to be captured by the fact that you have to, that whoever is carrying your podcast is going to have to be responsible for what you say, and therefore you will have to be careful what you say. Is that how they get the little guys?
I think so, Nigel. I think that's ultimately where it's leading to. Even the example of the Western Standard, we're far below that $10 million threshold. But at the same time, even the pipeline, as I understand it, is going up on services like Spotify and Apple, iTunes. So those people that were ostensibly the targets of the legislation are indeed going to have to probably start watching what kind of content that they put on. I'd also like to say that this is also wrapped up a lot with C18, which is the Online News Act to force companies like Meta and Google to pay for linking to Canadian content. And Google in their blog yesterday said, and it was more with respect to C11, that what is considered to be a news agency should follow the criteria of the companies that have accepted the government bailout money to be considered a journalistic outlet.
Well, I think one of the things, Sean, not to take away from you here, Cory, but I think one of the things that's fairly important is that this legislation that we're talking about and these CRTC regulations that were announced last Friday have their genesis in Bill C11. And what has really happened here is that the government wants to make everybody who puts anything out into a broadcaster so that they can then apply the standards to that person. Now, CBC, CTV, Global, they've been broadcasting for years, but there's always been, under the CRTC, a stipulation that they have to do things in a certain type of way. They can't be extreme. They can't do what some people do on their podcasts. Otherwise, they get censured, and there are penalties. Well, the great thing about podcasting and just being able to upload your YouTube videos and so forth is that you never had to worry about whether it was all in good form and good taste and according to the spirit of the regulations. I guess now, if you do something a little crazy, they're going to cut you off. And not everybody who is speaking truth that needs to be heard is doing something crazy. So when Dave used that expression, which by the way was not original to me, but I'll take the credit, the anaconda of regulation. I was just watching a video of an anaconda the other day that came up when I tried to find the origin of the phrase. And, the coils sort of go around and they get a little tighter and a little tighter. And pretty soon you don't even hear the pig anymore. So it's going to be kind of like that, Sean, I think, that free speech in this country, they're just going to tighten it and tighten it. And it's not going to be like you had in authoritarian regimes where somebody comes in and walks into the newsroom and arrests everybody and sends them off to the gulag. You just will find the administrative effort of trying to say what you want to say isn't worth it anymore. That's the danger.
Sorry, Sean, go ahead.
I was going to say that's true because in the legislation, they are aware of some potential charter conflicts. And even though they are greatly expanding the role of CRTC to do things like collect personal information from these companies on their subscribers, the government went at pains to suggest that any of these infractions, this enhanced regulatory role for the CRTC, will not result in the creation of criminal offenses or criminal prosecution under the Act. But at the same time, they have noted that there's going to be some potential infringements on the role of the CRTC under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So that's another whole can of worms that nobody's really opened yet.
I think one of the things that's warming the cockles of my old curmudgeonly heart is seeing all the podcasters, many of whom we know, say, no, we're not going to do it. And I think our operations manager, James, has tweeted that we're not going to do it. It kind of reminds me of the firearms registry when people just said, no, I'm not going to do it. So I think there'll be a backlash amongst podcasters. They just won't do it because there's not many that are earning 10 million, even though we're pretty close. Actually, no, we're not. We need more advertising. Yeah, I don't think many podcasters will play along with this one.
But it's insidious, right? Like before I came to the Standard, I had my own little podcast. I'd set up an audio and I'd interview people, and I would also stream that to Facebook and YouTube. And I used a service called Podbean, which probably is over $10 million. The problem is I registered with them, not the CRTC. But Podbean has my information, and then it shares it out to Spotify and the other heavyweights, iTunes. They all now have my information. I'm registered with them. I think the CRT's been smart. CRTC, why go after all the little guys like me when they can just go to the hosts? And when they say to the hosts, this podcast has been inappropriate, you wipe them off of the air or we're going to come after you. It's turned them into the police, and it will be effective.
Gosh, it's like the waitress asking to see your QR code before she sits you down.
Made the restaurants the police.
Same basic playbook. There is one other thing that we need to put out here on this matter, Cory. I know you've got 3 other fascinating subjects to go to, but you can see why the CRTC exists in this sense that you have an electromagnetic spectrum and somebody has got to be the policeman so you can actually use it so you don't get 2 people trying to broadcast on the same frequency. So I inadvertently, in a column on this, used the phrase, the government owns the airwaves. No, they don't. But they are the most logical entity to police the airwaves. But the thing is, they don't own the internet. They have no actual business in this, in trying to police the internet. This is a straight intrusion of government force into something that was previously free and unregulated. That is an iniquity in itself.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, it's hard to resist this, though, the way they've structured it. So before I let you go, Sean, I mean, I know you're following this and you're going to be writing further, but you see any signs of how groups or individuals or anything are resisting this or can resist this?
Well, it was kind of ironic because I had to put a briefing paper together for our publisher, Derek Fildebrandt, on C18, and going on the websites and looking through supposedly some of the public comments, and there were none. And I also have to laugh about Nigel's reference to owning the airwaves, because it's actually a Ramones song. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, Nigel, but it's "We Own the Airwaves."
I don't think Nigel listens to that type of music.
Well, we'll see as this unfolds. I mean, it's far from over. So thanks for the update, Sean, and then we'll let you get back on her there.
Thank you.
See you, Sean.
So, yeah, I mean, just a little further on that one, because I don't think enough people, the common public, realize just how insidious and problematic this is. And that's the scary thing. You know, I said an anaconda, or like the frog and water analogy. Mm-hmm. People already plugged in might realize it, but they're a minority. And when they've lost this source of information, they might not even realize it was there in the first place. And that's really scary.
Canadians are generally apathetic, I think, anyways. I mean, look, we've had Trudeau for 10 years. That just shows you how that is. But yeah, it's a very, very important issue.
You know, this isn't central, but just I was watching, I think it was a podcast from Tucker Carlson, and he was recommending that if you care about facts, if you care about truth, you might want to start getting a collection of the books and the encyclopedias that you respect and that you want to make sure are still available to yourself and maybe to your children, because they can change anything on the internet. But we're still, I think, a fair way off before they can break into your house and seize your library and send it to the dump.
Send the firemen in to burn the inappropriate literature. I think somebody predicted that once.
Something to think about. Get it on paper. Keep it.
Hard copies.
If it matters.
Information. It's always been a struggle, and then this is just the latest chapter, but boy, they're getting bold. All right, well, let's move on to where there was a democratic exercise last night. Manitoba went to a general election. And I guess the pollsters, it sounds like they were kind of right in this one, Dave.
They were right. History was made last night in Manitoba with the election of our First Nation premier. Wab Canoe won, I believe. They're still counting at recording time, but looks like it's around 31 to 25 seats, defeating Premier Heather Stephenson, excuse me, and she immediately resigned last night. The big issue seemed to be healthcare. The NDP promising hundreds of more doctors and reopening closed hospitals, and that seems to have resonated with Manitobans. And they may wake up one day and say, "Oh my God, what have we done?" Because the last few NDP governments there have ended in overspending disasters. But the good people of Manitoba have decided 2 terms of Conservatives is enough, and the NDP orange flag is now risen.
Well, I mean, some of it, Heather Stephenson, she's becoming the leader of the Progressive Conservatives, she's never really been able to capture support. She's been the least popular premier in Canada in a number of polls for quite some time now, and she just wasn't able to bring it together. The NDP presented an alternative.
Well, I think, and I'm channeling our columnist on the spot in Manitoba, Linda Slobodian here, but I think that there's a tremendous hostile memory to the way that the government of Manitoba handled the whole COVID business. They were more restrictive than we were here in Alberta. They were more like the government of Quebec. And so much of it, as we've learned, was not necessary. So Manitobans apparently being, again, I'm channeling Linda here, but Manitobans being as unforgiving as they are, they're making her aware that, even though it was actually Brian Pallister who was premier at the time, and she's never been able to get past that. But I agree with Dave, the track record of NDP governments coming in and taking over something that is functioning reasonably well and then turning it into a nightmare for the taxpayers is a well-attested one. We have our own Rachel Notley to turn to for proof points. She has them by the bundle. But, when I first came to this country a long time ago, the social credit had been governing for 30 or 40 years. In came the NDP and Dave Barrett, lasted 2.5 years, and then the Social Credit Party was back for another 20 because I was not going to do that again, and then they did, of course. But
Manitoba actually had a balanced budget last year.
Yeah.
And I'll bet you dollars to donuts it's not balanced at this point next year because of increased NDP spending. But getting back to your comments on COVID, there were a couple of Tory cabinet ministers who were pictured during the lockdowns flaunting, at parties and not wearing masks and not, social distancing enough. And, Manitobans didn't forget all that because it was a case of politicians doing what's good for thee is not good enough for me. So they wore it. I think you're right. It was a COVID fallout.
Comparisons were indeed drawn to behavior at the Sky Palace.
Yes.
In our very own Alberta government. It's most unfortunate, but when you sort of lash out in anger, whether it's in a domestic dispute or in an election, you usually end up wishing you hadn't done that.
Oh, hypocrisy infuriates people. I mean, whether it was the Sky Palace or the Manitoba issues, or that was happening in the UK as well. I mean, it was devastating. People were seeing on both sides of people thinking that the government was too restrictive. Well, then when you're suffering under those restrictions and you see them not following through, or the people who feel that the restrictions are appropriate, and they're saying, well, here these guys are putting everybody at risk by not masking and gathering. So you lose support on both sides.
I was going to say, you really don't have a constituency left, do you?
No.
Nobody's going to say.
They just don't get it. And that ire can last for years as it's hung over Stephenson later on. But, I mean, the presumption that they'll fall into deficit is probably a safe one, but Prairie Socialists have often been a bit of a different bunch. The ones in Saskatchewan under Romano were quite pragmatic. I mean, Romano balanced the budget. He was forced to by high interest rates and overspending. But is it impossible to believe that Premier Kinnew could be fiscally restrained?
Well, it does go against the grain. One expenditure that is now his problem is the possible excavation of the landfill, which has a price tag of $180 million, which doesn't sound very much in the way politics is these days, but is still, is that the sort of thing you want to spend your money on? The background to that is that a number of Indigenous women were murdered. There is a fellow who's accused of their murders in custody awaiting trial. And the suspicion is that he disposed of the bodies in a landfill outside Winnipeg. But he did so long ago that the possibility of finding this is a tragic case, by the way. I'm trying not to, I don't want to sound like I'm being too clinical about this. This is a heartbreaker. But the chances of finding human remains when you don't know where they were put, if they were put there at all, that's actually not proven. If they were put there, how do you find them? What's going to be left? And is there, in fact, a greater danger to the people who are asked to sift through, thousands of tons of what we have thrown away, which often is contaminated by everything you can imagine. So there are dangers to this, but Canoe, I believe, in his campaigning, promised to do this. So now,
and it was quite a spectacle because the Tories campaigned against it.
yes.
They took out newspaper ads saying we will not search the dump. And even I will add today, the feds said they were going to pony in $750,000 out of what $180 million cost.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's one campaign promise he's got to live up with.
Well,
that itself could
or else he's
cause
off to a
budget
bad
problems.
start. But I mean, that's a bad.
Well, and to add a sympathetic ear, I mean, if it was your family member who disappeared, presumably murdered, and you did truly believe their body had been disposed in a landfill, I mean, how awful and humiliating. And you don't like to think of them not being properly interred, whatever your local cultures may call for. But, I can't subscribe to the no price is too high mentality on things. Sometimes the price is too high.
Yep.
$180 million is way, and we know this is an estimate. It would be much more than that if they were to be thorough, and the bodies might not even be there. This ties into another issue that is just since we segued in, it's something I've been on about a lot. Why is it that we're willing to spend, or some activists, $180 million to look for the bodies of two people who may or may not be there, and we still haven't excavated a single one in Kamloops where supposedly as many as 200 murdered children may be buried? Yet we can't do that, which you could probably do at a few thousand per grave, to be blunt about it. We've got a big double standard going on here.
Cory, I would advise you, if that is the way you think, to say it out loud now while you can.
Yes, CRTC.
I don't think that's going to fly when that's not going to be considered fair comment when the CRTC is adjudicating your podcast.
It is
Denialism.
It
You're
is
in denial, Cory.
frustrating, though. I mean, is it sacred indeed to reclaim the remains of murdered Indigenous people and reunite them with the family and properly inter them, or is it not? Because among the activists set, I'm seeing a very clear-cut double standard going on here right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, you're right.
Which led to an odd wedge issue that really did impact the Manitoba election. I mean, what an untenable position for the PCs to be in. I mean, you don't want to say yes to it because you're opening that up. But it'll be interesting to see where Mr. Canoe goes when the finances come in.
There's one other place where it'll be interesting to see where Mr. Canoe goes. As we've been covering in the Western Standard for more than a year, there's considerable interest in an energy corridor from Alberta through Saskatchewan, along Indigenous-owned lands out to Churchill for the purpose of exporting energy. Now then, will Mr. Canoe, as a committed ND peer, back that plan, which is basically an end run around federal legislation that makes it very hard to build pipelines across provincial borders. But if it's on Indigenous land, it's a little different. So will to coin a political phrase, will he see the business case for doing that? Maybe advance that. Because Mrs. Stephenson, I'm afraid, was not very helpful on that file.
She was lukewarm at best on that,
At
actually.
best, yes.
Mr. Trudeau welcomed Mr. Canoe today by saying it's nice to have a premier he can work with again. Another shot at Ms. Smith.
Yes, well, but I mean, again, maybe I'd like at this point to give the benefit of the doubt. Mr. Kinney is an unknown. He seems to be a smart gentleman, but
And it is the benefit of the doubt. It's an open question. Sometimes NDP premiers they know they got to get the money from somewhere, and they do what they have to do.
And if it's partnerships as has been proposed for some of these corridors with other Indigenous groups, it might be something that actually Mr. Kinney could facilitate more effectively than Stephenson was. Well, she just never seemed to be into it. I never could understand that out of her. She wouldn't say no, but she wouldn't say yes either. I think that's part of the problems with her leadership in general.
That's why she was Canada's worst premier. She didn't do anything.
No. And if you stand for nothing, eventually it catches up. Or, well, some, except for our federal leader in Ottawa. We may as well segue into that in federal, provincial. Actually, I guess he does stand for a large number of things, just
Wrong.
rarely gets them done properly. So Prime Minister Trudeau was speaking to Alberta business leaders in Ottawa, Dave.
He was. It's sort of a Trade Alberta mission down to Ottawa. We sometimes take part in these in other countries, going to other countries, but it's very rare to send en masse onto Ottawa. 50 CEOs of some of the top 50 Alberta companies went down to Ottawa, to try and hold talks and talk some sense into them down there. Prime Minister spoke to them, addressed them on Tuesday night, and took a few shots at Premier Smith, saying she was basically trying to stoke the fires of fear, and accused Premier Smith of being a fearmonger with all these. As we know, the UCP has now started advertising campaigns in I think 4 other provinces, telling people that enough's enough. We can't afford it. We can't afford the net zero electricity. We can't afford the carbon tax. And in fact, there was a big van with that message parked outside the House of Commons yesterday. So MPs got to see that as they left question period for the day. But last night it doesn't appear that there's any warming at all between Trudeau and Smith.
Oh, but I mean, Trudeau was speaking to a business crowd, not his own vanity might make him think that they like him, but in reality, I think most particularly Albertan business leaders don't think highly of a lot of the policies coming out of there. I don't know if taking shots at Smith to that crowd is endearing Mr. Trudeau to them in that environment.
Yeah, think about it, Cory. What a situation it has come to where one part of the country has to get together 50 of its best and brightest to go and market itself to a federal government, which they've got. They've got a Ministry of Western Economic Diversification. They got a similar entity for Eastern Canada. They say they're interested. They say they want to do good things, but obviously the perception here is that no, they don't. And we have to go there in order to get something done and try and change minds. But what a commentary on the state of relations between the central Canadian region, what we call the Laurentian region, and other parts of the country. We spent a lot of time criticizing Mr. Trudeau for a lot of things, but boy, this kind of division is a product of his leadership. Totally.
Lack of.
Well, the leadership that he's given, which is deficient in so many ways. Doesn't surprise me that he would take the opportunity to take shots at Smith, and business people being what they are, I wouldn't count on their loyalty. Some of them, no doubt, laughed politely, and some actually thought, it would be better if we had somebody else. That's unfortunately the way big money thinks.
Well, they'll work with who they have to. I mean, they're in business, not politics, though the two overlap quite often in the old Venn diagram. But I'm waiting for that shoe to drop. They're hinting at it all the time. Guilbeault's talking about it. Wilkinson's talked about it in Paris. He's afraid to talk about it here. They're going to bring in an emissions cap. I mean, it's almost a done deal, and it is going to adversely impact businesses out here. And, this sort of meeting would have been the opportunity for Trudeau to at least try to, I guess, make the case for why that won't harm them that badly. But
they've said, Gilbo has said the cap is coming in before the end of the year, and we're already into October. The end of the year is getting pretty close, so it's coming. It's going to be quick, and I think that's going to be the day when the shoe drops, so to speak. That full on war from Alberta to Ottawa, because it's not going to be anything that Alberta can live with. I don't think.
Sometimes, Dave, I get the suspicion that these guys know their time is up. Whenever the next election comes, they're going to be to the sidelines for at least 4 years. So they're doing all the dumb stuff that they believe in, and to hell with the consequences. The trouble is, some of the dumb stuff that they do is going to take much longer to undo whoever forms the next government.
It's kind of ironic. That's one of the few downsides I see with term limits that we see in other jurisdictions with a leader. When they hit a point where they know this is my last gasp, that's when you see the worst of the patronage appointments, the ideologically bent policies. Then, okay, well, I'm going to fire this in because I won't be here to face the consequences if it fails or goes.
And the entire world has sort of taken a look at the environment stuff and say, okay, it's a good idea, but we can't do it at the pace everybody wants to do it. We need to slow down because it's going to be very expensive, except Canada. Everybody in the world is drilling for more oil and doing natural gas, and they seem to find a business case for it. But in Canada, and we're the only major country in the world, we still are plowing ahead, guns a-blazing. And I think, you may be right. The Liberals realize that at most they've got 2 years left, and they're going to try and do as much damage as they can.
Well, they certainly can. I mean, even in Ontario, a provincial report came out from a group out there, and it said that if they phase out natural gas, as has been talked about for Ontario to meet the targets that have been set for it for their generation, it's only 10% of Ontario's capacity, but it would actually lead to an increase in bills for average Ontarians of as much as $3,200 a year. Like, this is what's catching up with the Trudeau government, I think, in public support. Like, people just can't take more wallops to their pocketbook for his ideals, but he won't back down. But even the provinces are starting to say, look, we can't do this.
There's a commentator by the name of Warren Kinsella last night tweeted, just found out my mortgage payments are doubling next month, ... and the Liberals wonder why they're losing in the popularity rose. It's the economy is starting to hit. It's starting to hit Canadians hard.
Well, I mean, with 2 more years to go, though, I was thinking earlier today, I've been predicting it. I thought Trudeau is going to take his figurative walk in the snow soon, because it's just nothing's gone right for him in 6 months. Everything he touched has turned to a disaster, and his personal life is serious. Got some challenges going on, which is not really our business, but it obviously must impact his decisions and where he's looking going forward. But looking at his attitude going in, he's reminding me almost of that Iraqi minister from the past war. Everything's blowing up in the background. The guns are on their doorstep, and he's still saying, "No, don't worry, everything's good. It's doing all right." Like, he just won't.
Just look at this week with the election of the Speaker, Canada's first Black Speaker. He was a former parliamentary secretary to Trudeau, and had an ethics violation 7 months ago. Yet it didn't stop the Liberals from getting their own speaker again. And Trudeau is pictured today in the House sticking his tongue out him and winking at him. I mean, the disdain that Trudeau has is unbelievable.
Yeah. No, nothing will change, I'm afraid, with this fellow. But I honestly believe he means to stick it out, which means electoral death for his party. To be honest with you, I'm almost glad that that's the plan.
It's a painful way to do it. It's like a chemotherapy. You're going to cause a lot of damage to healthy tissue on the way of getting rid of this.
So, okay, but look, let's say he stepped down tomorrow. Who's going to come in and replace him? Would we like Chrystia Freeland any better? She just commented that I beg your pardon, it was her department which commented that they didn't even know how much we were spending for interest. That's the kind of stuff you should know. Would you be better off with Mark Carney? Now, he probably would know. Governor of the Bank of Canada, Governor of the Bank of England. I imagine he's sort of...
Carney's frightening because he's actually quite bright.
He's actually quite bright. So if you think it's tough, I say let Mr. Trudeau do what he can for the next 2 years, lose the election, and start putting things back together again. You know when they say build it back better? Maybe just put it back the way you found it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and
What an election slogan.
but I mean, and I could see that with some of them who've already feathered their nests well enough, saying, "Fine, we'll ride this 2 years out and go out in the sunset, in our blaze of glory." But when is that loyalty of Liberal members of caucus is going to fray for some of them? Some of those backbenchers realizing, like, I'm going to be done. I mean, they must have had some aspirations in getting into politics and some goals. Are they going to sink with that ship? They're just insistent no matter what when they realize.
Yeah, at some point you would think the long knives would come out, but no sign of them yet. They're all being kept sheathed.
Well, they can use bats. I'll mail them stuff.
Yeah. You know the magic number? 6 years. That's when the pension kicks
Yes.
in for members of parliament. So you've got to win your seat and then you got to hold it for at least 2 years. Then you get 6 years, now you're on pension. So whatever they're feeling about their chances in 2025, you can bet that that's a factor in the back of the mind. Wow, I'll be just over the 6 years if I got it,
There's a lot of them will be who under the 6 years.
Yeah. So they would have more to worry about. That'll be a consideration. I won't tell you that.
No,
They
of
think
course, they'll never admit it. All right, well, let's get on to our federal government and their fiscal ineptitude. They always offer lots of it. Apparently, they're cutting, but not cutting $1 billion from the military.
Yeah, late last week, our top generals were at a committee hearing where it was revealed that the Liberals have asked them to cut $1 billion out. I mean, in my opinion, if there's one phase of Canada's productivity that shouldn't be cut, it should be the military. Our military is already in a bad place. They had the biggest joint exercises ever in NATO over Europe with the Air Force a few months ago, and Canada couldn't go because I don't think we had any planes that could get there. It's embarrassing. Our Navy's embarrassing, just in terms of the number of ships they can put out. Certainly, our submarines are a laughingstock. So to then say, okay, we want another $1 billion out, to me, it's not farsightedness. It's just, but then on the other hand, they're taking $1 billion from the Canadian military, but they've given $9 billion to the Ukraine's military. So that's leading to a lot of questions being asked, Nigel.
It certainly is. The thing about trying to cut $1 billion out of the military, they face the same problem that you or I would face if we were trying to take money out of our budget. What can you cut? Well, you can't cut the rent. You can't cut the mortgage payment. The bank tells you what it's going to take just to console it. It's sort of tough to cut the power bills. If you need it, you need it. If you don't need it, switch it off. But if you do need it, you're going to have to pay the bill. And you can go through your family budget line by line by line and say, well, there's so much of this that we can't actually touch. Alimony payments, try and cut that. Good luck. So what do you cut? Well, you cut how much you spend on eating and on gasoline and things like that. And what the military is now facing is that all the stuff that they actually do, the training, the preparation, is where they're going to have to find that money from. There will be no less people occupied at DND headquarters. The ships will still be tied up alongside. They just won't be able to afford the fuel to take them to sea. If you are a squatty and you want to go and you're hoping to get trained up on some machine gun, you're going to find that they don't have the money for the ammo anymore. What they had, they gave away, and with a budget cut, it's ammunition that is. But they have so many fixed costs. However many people they really have, they got to pay them. So that you can't cut unless you find that the predictions really are true. There's a hell of a lot less people on strength than what they claim. So it just renders the whole operation, I won't say useless, because that would be an insult to the people who are still trying. But I remember Harper used to say that our line was that we need to give the troops the equipment they need and the respect they deserve. Under Mr. Trudeau, they have had no equipment and they've had no respect. And it's the latter that is the killer. And this cut is just one more kick.
Well, it's surprising in a sense of not that Trudeau cares about our military. I think it's pretty clear he doesn't. But he cares about himself a lot. Mm-hmm. He always has. And he fancies himself as an international player. That's why he loves those overseas gatherings. He likes to pretend, and I think most of the world has seen through that. They don't take the buffoons seriously, but he still goes. One of the areas, though, is with NATO, which has become so important of late with the affairs going on in Eastern Europe right now. And they've always been critical of Canada. We haven't pulled our weight. I mean, they won't kick us out of NATO, but they say, the amount you're supposed to be obligated for domestic military spending to be a NATO member, we're well under that. We have been for a long time. And to cut further puts us even worse and taken even less seriously. And we get sidelined from more NATO events, talks, and actions. I mean, can Trudeau not see that? I mean, if he wanted to buy his way into being taken seriously on the federal or the international front, that could have been one of the means. And he's just sidelined himself further as well.
No, you just take a look at the billions and billions he's given in subsidies to electric vehicle, the battery places and manufacturing places. I mean, the military could have used that. It was a world of good. Food banks across the country could have used that to feed hungry Canadians. But he's continuing on with these vanity climate projects that are costing taxpayers billions and billions of dollars. So. As we can agree that he doesn't care about the military, and this is just yet another priority he's got wrong and cannot see it.
You have to wonder what will happen when they actually have an emergency in this country for which the military is the only solution.
Well, and that's something that, Canadians don't like talking about, but the reality is our security as a nation has always been fully dependent on our southern neighbors. I mean, there are some of the smallest nations on earth could successfully invade and take Canada over quite quickly, but they know that juggernaut down south of us would not tolerate that for a minute. But talk about taking your friends for granted. They get a little tired of pulling the weight on our behalf. I mean, not just NATO, then we're getting on to even Joe Biden, who doesn't seem to be all that endeared with Trudeau either. This is just
their relationship has certainly soured from the halcyon days. But certainly, the Chinese invasion plans when they're coming across the Pacific, they're not worried about Canada, because we can maybe rustle up, one warship and if we're lucky, maybe a leaky submarine to stop them. But thank goodness the States are there to protect us.
Mm-hmm. Since when I was working on seismic projects in the Arctic up on the Beaufort, we would joke about it, but it was the truth. Under this, we're on a camp frozen in a barge out on the ocean. They're playing games under us in the ice. The Russians are down there, the Chinese are down there, the Americans are down there. They know about the resources of the high Arctic. We actually housed Government of Canada scientists in our camp because the oil companies could get to the higher Arctic reaches where our own scientists couldn't afford to get up there. But who wasn't down there? No Canadian subs, because we don't have them. We had diesel ones that we cooked a couple of our sailors just trying to bring them over from England when we bought them. You need nuclear capability to get up there. Yeah. So how do we claim our sovereignty up there when we can't even reach it?
And war discussion aside, I think Nigel was hinting at it earlier. What happens if the big one hits Vancouver? And, it's a natural disaster, and the military wouldn't be able to overly help much. Because they just don't have the manpower or training anymore to do it.
Yeah. That's the way it goes. And, you can play with the science fiction of this as well. And, imagine a situation which is easier to imagine these days than it has been when the United States is so preoccupied with its own internal politics that bland assumption we have that they'll always be there for us may not be so. I mean, actually, it would have been just been science fiction to talk like this 20 years ago, but so much has changed down there recently that it's kind of getting a little bit end of empire about it. So say that another country, let's not name names, but say somebody said, well, we're putting a research station on an island in the high Arctic. Yes, we know you think it's yours, but actually not everybody agrees, and we're going to be there. Now what are you going to do? We don't have the capability to meet that sort of a threat.
No, and we had that ongoing battle with Denmark over a Hans Island, I think it was. It's symbolic,
Yeah,
but it's real. And there are people questioning who has sovereignty over those areas. I mean, I know Canada will never have a giant standing army. We can't. It's just sheer numbers. But I think we should have one that has at least a limited technological, high standard, so we can reach every corner of what we claim as our territory. To be honest, any country going before a world tribunal saying they don't have a claim to that area because they can't even get to it is a pretty valid case.
Wouldn't it be funny if Prime Minister Modi, he's so pissed off at Trudeau right now, he may say, okay, let's take over this little island here, just as a poke to the chest of Trudeau.
we shouldn't even talk like this on the air. If they're listening,
We do know that the Indian news networks have.
You're a star there.
Standard, yeah. I got more of an audience in India than I do in Alberta these days, but I wouldn't drop that bug in their ear.
Well, listen, you may have more of an audience there than here, Cory, but I want to see you coming in one of those caftans with a little hat.
I respect the Indian population.
Don't do what the Prime Minister does.
No, and I certainly value the Albertan audience more so than those in India. Well, okay, we'll cap that off with where that's
I think we should.
standing. That's enough for that. Those of you in India or Alberta, though, we appreciate your subscriptions. So if you haven't subscribed already, that's how we stay independent. That's how we're going to beat the podcast bans. We'll just go around them. We need you guys. westernstandard.news/membership, $9.99 a month, $100 a year, gets you past the paywall, and you can see all of our content. So again, thank you, Nigel and Dave. And well, we've solved a few of the world's problems. We'll get the rest of them next week at this time. You bet. All right, thanks, guys.
The current Lethbridge feed grain prices for October 4th are as follows. Cash barley's at $3.40, feed wheat's at $3.55, and corn's unchanged at $3.52 per metric ton. In the milling wheat markets, December Minneapolis futures lost 11 cents at $7.14, with local hardwood spring bids for October movement at $9.40 per bushel. In the oil seeds, nearby canola futures are down $2.70 at $7.14.70 per ton, with delivered values for October movement at $15.88 per bushel. In the pulse markets, nearby red lentils are trading at 36.5 cents a pound, and yellow peas remain at $10.75 per bushel. In the cattle markets, December live cattle gained 55 cents at $186.20 per 100 weight. For more information on grain marketing, call me at 403-394-1711. I'm Sean Smith at Marketplace Commodities, accurate real-time marketing information and pricing options.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny